I'm Rob Maines. I'm a writer for Baseball Prospectus. I also supervise BP en Español, our Spanish language content. And while we got a second, I was just going to mention SABR has, for those of you who are kind of new to analytics, they have an analytics certification program that you can get information about at sabr.org/analytics/certification. It's a self-paced course, and at the end of the course, there's 3 levels. There's a study problem that will be reviewed by somebody at staff at Baseball Prospectus, including me. I do some of them. So if you're interested in learning more from what you're seeing here, I encourage you to look at the course. Okay, what I'm going to talk today about is whether pitchers learn to avoid the third time through the order penalty. And in doing this, I'm going to build on some research that I presented at this conference a couple years ago. I'm going to just briefly review that. I think everyone here knows what the third time through the order penalty is. In the book, the influential 2007 book by Tango, Lichtman, and Dolphin, they had a good explanation of it. The basic idea here is that pitchers, when they face the order a second time, tend to be less successful than they were the first time. And when they go on and face a third time, they're considerably less successful than they were the first time. And obviously than they were the second time. This information is easily available today. This is from Baseball Reference. And what you can see there is what pitchers give up the first 9 batters they face, batters 10 through 18, et cetera. And what you can see, this is 2023 data. First time through the order, pitchers allowed a 727 OPS. Second time through, it was 3% higher, 748. And then the third time was additional 5% on top of that, 782. What I proposed 2 years ago was 2 refinements to what Baseball Reference provides us. One is that the data that you see from Baseball Reference includes all pitchers, how they do the first starting pitchers, first 9, second 9, third 9 batters. And what I proposed is that if you look only at pitchers who actually face the order a third time in the start, who face 19 or more batters, by doing that, you can eliminate pitchers who get pulled after 10, 15, whatever pitches. Often that's because of ineffectiveness. And so there's a possibility that by including those pitchers who get pulled early in the first and second time through figures that you get, typically you might understate the third time through the order penalty. Similarly, on yesterday's panel about pitching, Vince Gennaro made a good point about lineup position. Say you're a starting pitcher and you get pulled after facing 22 batters. Well, the third time through the order, when you were facing batters 1 through 4 of the opposing lineup, you had a much tougher assignment than you did the first 2 times through when you were facing batters 1 through 9, because you were facing the underbelly of the other team's lineup. And so consequently, since the best hitters are at the top of the lineup, a pitcher facing less than 9 batters the third time through has a tougher assignment. And so that might overstate the third time penalty. So what I did was I looked at, by batting order, how pitchers who faced the order at least 3 times did the first, second, and third times through. And here's the data. 5-year data ending in 2021. I scaled it. So the first time through, the OPS they allowed was 100. Second time, you can see in general, things got a little bit worse for them and then got considerably worse the third time through. This is the structure I'm going to use throughout this presentation, that I'm going to call the third time through the order penalty the difference in relative OPS. OPS the third time through compared to the average of the first 2 times. And the only difference from what you see here and what I'm going to show you is that I'm discarding the number 9 hitters, because if you've got games involving a pitcher hitting, often the third time through you're getting a pinch hitter, way better OPS that skews the data. Now, what was interesting is that, there's the third time through the order penalty, but what I found was that the penalty has been consistent through the division play era at least. I went back to 1969. This is leadoff hitters, how they did the third time versus the first 2 times. You can see there's some bouncing around between the years, but in general, they're worse consistently the third time through compared to the first 2. And what's interesting about this is that, you'll hear people complain about the third time through the order penalty as if it's a modern construct. that was created by analytics. And what you can see is that this has been a part of baseball for at least 50 years. It's been consistent. The reason why we know about it now and act on it is, number one, because we got the information, but also number two, in 1972, a team didn't have 8 guys in the bullpen who can all throw 97 with movement. And so pitchers are getting taken out of games earlier because the third time penalty now, not because the third time penalty is something new, but just because it's something that there are remedies for. So that's what I presented back then. What was the impetus for this presentation is the Effectively Wild podcast, which Meg Rowley, whom we saw this morning, is one of the co-hosts of, was talking about the third time through the order penalty. And a listener named Sean Hagan sent in an email to them saying that he was listening to a national broadcast, and the announcer suggested that the reason why we have the third time through the order penalty is that pitchers don't learn how to pitch the third time through the way that they did in prior years. And that kind of rang a bell for me because a couple of years ago, I was watching a playoff game and an announcer said this: "I hate talking about the third time through because it's a moot point. Nobody ever does it. So you can tell me all the numbers you want third time through. If you're not trained to know how to pitch, then you're showing the hitter everything you've got in the first 2 times, so you've got nothing to give the third time, ... We just don't give guys the opportunity to do it." So that stat to me means absolutely nothing because there's just not enough opportunities to gauge it right. Now, I remember thinking at the time that that kind of flies in the face of what I just showed you. I spared you batters 4 through 8, but trust me, those graphs all look the same. And I recall I wrote about this. Unfortunately, I don't remember which announcer it was that had said this stuff, but I thought that, maybe this is a different way of looking at the third time through the order penalty. Maybe there is something to the idea that pitchers can learn how to pitch the third time through. So let's see whether there's some evidence for that. What I did is I looked at all starting pitchers from the period 1969 through 2014. 1969, because that's the first year I had data. 2014, because that's the last year, good trivia question, where pitchers averaged 6 innings per start. Probably not going to see that again forever, long time. It was 5.97. I'm rounding to 1 decimal. And what I looked at is just pitchers whose entire career fell between those endpoints. And I looked at pitchers who had at least a 10-year career that involved at least 200 starts. And that gave me 253 pitchers. Now, of them, I cut up their career. I looked at their first 5 years in the majors, and I figured that's when they're learning how to pitch the third time through the order. I then looked at the next 5 to say, well, that's when they've learned how to pitch the third time. See if there's a difference, because if pitchers learn, we should see a significant diminution, if not elimination, of the third time through the order penalty. And I also looked at years 6 through the end of the pitcher's career, just to see whether there's something going on that is sustainable over a long career. What I found when I had this data is there's kind of 3 groups of pitchers. One is there were 27 pitchers who in either the first or the second 5 years of their career faced the order a third time fewer than 50 times. I threw them out. I figured that wasn't a big enough sample. That's guys like Bob Walk, who started his career as a relief pitcher, or Jeremy Bonderman, who started his career throwing scads of innings and then his arm fell off. So I just figured those weren't sufficiently large samples to be included. So now we're down to 226 pitchers. The biggest group was this grouping, where in both the first 5 and the second 5 years of their career, they faced the third time between 50 and 99 times, which is, about 10 to 20 times per season. That's pitchers like Pedro Martinez, who was used kind of lightly in the first years of his career, or Orlando Hernandez, who was really old in the last 5 years of his career. But that was a good size sample, 122. And then the most robust group was the ones who faced the order a third time at least 100 times over both the first 5 years of their career and the second 5. 104 pitchers. All 3 of the great Braves rotation, Smoltz, Glavine, and Maddox did that, as well as guys that you may not have thought of for a while, like Steve Renko. So before I show you the results, let me just go through the limitations of the data. First, there's a selection bias going at work here. Obviously, if we're looking at pitchers who had 10-year careers in which they had at least 200 starts, we're talking about pitchers who are A, effective, and B, healthy. And so we should expect better results from them than what we would see with the whole universe of starting pitchers. Second, the reason why I chose 5 years to learn how to pitch and then another 5 to have learned it is because I made it up. That might not be the right thing. Maybe it should be 4 years. Maybe it should be 6 years. Maybe all pitchers are different, but had to use something to have the methodology. I didn't do any adjustment for the team the pitcher performed for, who he was pitching in the games where he was facing the order a third time, and I didn't look at run environment in which he was pitching. I do think that by looking at relative OPS the third time relative to what he averaged the first 2 times for a pitcher, some of those issues are going to get at least minimized, but those are the limitations of the data. So let me give you an example of what I was looking at. Here's a pitcher who pitched over 100 games into the third time through in the first 5 years of his career and the second 5. I just picked one guy at random. And what you can see here is that this pitcher, in the first 5 years of his career, when he faced leadoff hitters in games that he faced the order at least 3 times, he allowed a 631 OPS the first 2 times and 833 the third time. So that was a 32% penalty. Number 2 hitters, he 652 the first 2 times, 572 the second. He was 12% better. I'm going to stop reading you numbers, just go down to the one at the bottom there. And that's a weighted average, weighted by the number of plate appearances for batting orders 1 through 8 of his third time through the order penalty, measured as OPS third time versus the average of the first 2 times, about 9%. The long-term average was 10.6% in this analysis, so he was better than average. And what you can see is then the next 5 years, after he learned how to pitch the third time through, he was basically twice as bad, a 16% penalty. Now, before we all go dunking on John Smoltz, I will also add that if you look at his entire career, which was really long, 8.9% in the first 5 years of his career. Over the entire rest of his career, his penalty was only 6.6%. He was just a slow learner. So let's look at the groups that I identified. First, the ones that we had a really robust sample, the ones where 104 pitchers, 100 times they faced the order a third time, first and second 5 years of their career. 68% of those 104 got better. That's a pretty substantial majority. And what you can see is they were worse than that 10.6% average the first 5 years of their career, way better the second 5. And there is some regression during the rest of their career, but they ended up being considerably better. They learned how to pitch better the third time through. There were 36 pitchers, though, in this group who were considerably worse after their learning period. And even though there was some regression, they remained worse. So overall for this group, they were about average. Again, 10.6% is the average. In the first 5 years of their career, they were better. Penalty didn't go away, but they were better after that. The bigger group was the ones 50 to 99 times facing the order a third time in the first and or the second 5 years of their career. This is 122 pitchers. 59 got better, and they got considerably better, as you can see. However, a majority got worse, and they got way worse. We're talking about switching, again, these are around a 10.6% average. We're totally flipping for both groups. So if you look at the totals here, these guys learned nothing. They were 10.5% worse the third time through in the first 5 years of their career, exactly the same the next 5 years. And if you take their entire career after 5 years, they were barely better. So conclusions of all these pitchers together, 226 of them, 127 got better. And again, they got a good deal better. 99 got worse, a good deal worse. So overall, what you can see is about average for the first 5 years. They got better, but not a lot better over the second 5. And then the penalty over the rest of their career, while it was muted from pitchers as a whole and what they had the first 5 years, it wasn't that big of a diminution. To give you an example, 10.6%, which was a long-term average. In 2023, if your OPS is 10.6% worse the third time versus the first two, that's like facing Whit Merrifield the first two times and then Nolan Arenado the last time on 2023 numbers. That 8.4% number is basically the difference between Stephen Kwan 2023 and Fernando Tatis Jr. 2023. It's a meaningful difference. What I think this shows is the difficulty of learning how to pitch a third time through the order. Again, 226 pitchers, less than 10% actually learned how to pitch so that their third time through the order completely disappeared. They're actually better the third time than the first two times. And you're thinking, well, was it Halladay? Was it Martinez? No, the only three guys who had over 150 career wins were Bob Welch, Doug Drabek, and Bert Hooton, who are fine pitchers, but this isn't what you think of. These are the guys who really learned how to do this well the third time. There were 9 Hall of Famers in this group, tiny sample size, but of the 9, 4 got better in the rest of their career after their first 5 years. 5 of them got worse. And I would point out the 5 who got worse, those are really good numbers regardless. A lot of that is because one of those 5 is Pedro Martinez. Pedro Martinez had almost no third time through the order penalty through his entire career. He was amazing. And if you say to me 2023 ALCS, I will respond, that was the 4th time. So what are the conclusions here? One is that there is evidence that pitchers learn to face the opposing order a third time more successfully. You did see, again, for what's a better than average group in all likelihood, a reduction in their third time penalty. That said, the improvement is limited. You go, from 10.6 to 8.4, there's still a third time through the order penalty. And so the idea that I think is the key here is that the third time through the order penalty remains after learning. You might be able to reduce it a little bit, but you can't eliminate it. You're going to be stuck with it. And that's with the most successful and durable pitchers that we've seen over the last 50 years. I don't think that there's a lot of evidence that you can really learn how to pitch a third time through to the degree that you can get rid of the penalty. Now, at this point, I would normally talk to you about areas for further research of this, but I was talking with Baseball Prospectus's director of R&D, Harry Pavlidis, and he pointed out to me that I've now given 2 presentations about the third time through the order penalty, and were I to do anything else, it would suck. And so somebody else is going to have to relieve me if you want to do anything else in this area. So before questions, just want to acknowledge Sean Brody, who retrieved all this data for me. 1 line for every plate appearance of every pitcher from 1969 through 2021. It was millions of lines. Derek Rhodes, who does injury stuff at Baseball Prospectus for us, helped me out with the visualizations for this, and SABR and SIS for making these research presentations possible. So with that, I can start throwing the cube around for any questions.
Very good, insightful way to look at that. With managers almost religiously adhering to the third time penalty and yanking them because of these OPSs going up, those OPS are averages, which include some of the really bad pitchers and some of the really good pitchers. Would it behoove the managers to realize that, yes, they go up in general, but that number is brought up because of I've got a Hall of Fame pitcher pitching. I'm going to trust him to go through for the third time instead of just religious. It's context dependent, not be married to that particular TTO.
Right. Well, look, point on one thing. There's still the vast majority of pitchers face the order, at least for a few batters, a third time. I think it was 63% last year, not positive. But yeah, what this shows is that on average, you're 10.6% worse. But if that 10.6% worse is the difference between allowing a 500 OPS and a 550 OPS, yeah, then probably makes sense to stick with that pitcher. I think that the real thought process for managers is this guy 10% worse or 8.8, whatever percent worse? Is he still better than anybody I've got in the bullpen? And I think that with modern bullpens, there's a decent chance he isn't.
I wonder, could you put the comparison to Smoltz slide up again?
Sure. I don't mean to pick on him, sort of.
Yeah. Here's my question. He seems to have gotten better, but had a problem with 6, 7, and 8. I mean, those are tremendously bad, aren't they? Numbers? No,
Yeah. Caveat here is, again, I said over 100 times that we're still, in his case, I think it was more like 130, 140. Those aren't a lot of plate appearances. And we don't know, again, well, I guess American League would be true as well. There might be some pinch hitting going on there. I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't read too much into any individual batting order position just because they're not real big samples. Okay, pass it back to Sean. Pass it back to the man who gave us the third time through the order numbers I showed earlier.
So Rob, I realize I'm asking you to do a literature search or review for me, but has there been much research on why the third time through the order penalty exists? Is it because of pitcher fatigue, or is it batter? I guess pinch hitters also have a penalty, so maybe it's just batter familiarity with the pitcher.
Yeah, there has been. Rob Arthur and I he's on team familiarity. I'm on team fatigue. But yeah, there's been a fair amount of writing on it. No one's really come to a conclusion. But yeah, those are certainly the two camps.
Thank you.
To what extent does the pitcher's arsenal have anything to do with this? For the group that improved, is there any indication that any of those pitchers had maybe gained another pitch to show to the batters?
That's a good question, and I do not know. That the relief analyst can look into that. Yeah.
So the Kevin Cash, Black Snail decision, what's your take on it?
On which?
Kevin Cash pulling Snell in the World Series?
See, I hope you were going to ask me okay. With the last game of the series this year, was it Gallen was working on a no-hitter, and then he got pulled. And if you listened, nothing against anybody that I've mentioned today, but during the World Series, I'd like to listen on ESPN radio. And Boog Shambi and Eduardo Perez had a fabulous discussion of the third time through the order penalty. And Perez said, look, I get it. He's working on a no-hitter. If you look at the exit velocity, the last 3 balls in play, it's the hardest of the game. I'd take him out. And he wound up being right. On the Snell thing, I think that the criticism that you can make there was more the choice of the reliever rather than whether to take out Snell. Who was it that they brought in? Patrick, do you remember? But he'd been lit up all series.
Anderson.
Yeah, Nick Anderson. Yeah. But just he didn't have it that in the series. All right. I think Vince wants back there.
Thanks, Rob. This is terrific to continue to dive into this topic. And even though Harry doesn't want you to do much more, I'd love to see you continue to talk about it. We talk about it, as you know. I've talked about this with you many times. I guess where I am is I'm failing to find and understand any motivation to eliminate this penalty, other than maybe me and 12 other people not wanting to see the third time through the order penalty because it doesn't need to exist. It's the result of policy decisions and strategy, right? So is there any motivation that this will ever change? I mean, do you see MLB teams striving to make this change, or there's just like we said yesterday on the panel? I mean, I think Nino said it. if you're really playing for strikeouts, then you want the arsenal unloaded at every point, and there's not much in reserve. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no impetus at all to do it. Partly because the graphs before with the history, it's existed forever. You know, Steve Carlton experienced it. Tom Seaver experienced it. So I think to some degree it's viewed as an intractable problem. But the second one is what Eno was talking about. You got pitchers in the minors, and Joe Sheehan's talking about this too, who pitch 3 innings, 4 innings, maybe 5 a start. You'd have to really change the whole development process to stretch starters out more, to even build up the endurance to be able to address this and then think about it. And given that it's been around, you know, kind of forever, I don't think that I think baseball to some degree just throwing up its hands on it.
Yeah.
Oh, you got to make a long throw, Vince.
No, that's not going to happen. John, you want to toss it up there? Let's bridge it. Where are we going here?
First, I'd like to thank you as a Mets fan. Thank you for picking on John Smoltz. But in all seriousness, is there ever a situation where despite there being a third time around the order penalty to put your starting pitcher out there the third time, like if you're up by a certain amount of runs, or maybe if you're down by a certain amount of runs?
Yeah, sure. The issue with the third time through the order penalty is in a close game where you've got better options in the bullpen, that's when you're going to think about taking the starter out. Or if it's really high leverage game, like in the World Series when Blake Snell's on the mound. If you're up by 6 or if you're down by 6, who cares? That was part of the Jack Morris Hall of Fame argument, is that he pitched to the score. I don't think that really exists. I think there's analysis that suggests that doesn't exist, but there certainly is a feeling that, you know, if going from a 700 OPS to a 780 OPS when you're in a game that's already well out of hand, kind of who cares? So yeah, there's reasons to preserve the bullpen, plenty of reasons to do that.
Going off the question about like what are some of the reasons why this would actually occur, the third time through effect. I was curious, you talked a little bit about like pitcher fatigue, but I was curious, what are some of the other mechanisms that have been written about why that could occur? But then kind of more importantly, like, I know you said you weren't going to do any more research on this topic, but
I won't present it.
but what do you think would be some ways of testing those like theories individually for, like, say, if pitcher fatigue itself is impacting or is happening like on the third time through, so on?
If you go to Baseball Reference and do a search on Rob Arthur calls himself that. Robert Arthur is known to Plume. He's done some pretty convincing research suggesting that it's fatigue. I know that he's done the research. As Sean suggested, there's a fair amount out there. I think it's a little bit above my pay grade, but you know, you can see that both ideas make sense. But there have been some pretty smart analysts who have looked at it. And I would start with Rob just because I'm familiar with his work.
First of all, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I'm just curious, you know, if a pitcher's going to go out there and brave the third time through the order, it just makes more sense that you'd want him to face the 7, 8, 9 hitters more than the 1, 2, 3 hitters.
Right.
And so I just personally would have thought that the opener would have gained more traction by now. So I'm curious if you just have any thoughts on the opener, if you think it's an effective remedy to the penalty, and if you think it'll start to become more commonplace going forward now that the concepts existed for a few years and people have kind of warmed up to it.
Yeah, the problem with the opener, and this is some SABR research that dates back a long time that I believe David Smith did, that he found that the reason why the home team starting pitcher tends to do better than the visiting team starting pitcher is that the home team starting pitcher knows exactly when he's going to throw his first pitch. So can tailor his whole warm-up routine for 7:05 p.m. on the dot. Everybody who's following him doesn't know for sure when he's going to come in. The problem with the opener, obviously is you're giving 1 or 2 innings to a guy who's going to know that. And then you want to give a lot to a guy who's not going to have that advantage. I think that's one of the reasons why the opener hasn't been more widely adopted. And then you got the whole issue of the psychology of your pitchers. Some guys aren't comfortable coming in relief. Some guys want to start there's a human, like an HR aspect to it. I think that also has stood in the way of its promulgation. And it's a matter of whether you got the talent on the team to do it. Anybody else? All the way down to Patrick. All right, I'm going to be impressed by this. Oh. Assist.
All right, so my question, we have an acronym problem. The 3rd time through the order problem and the 3 true outcomes.
Yes.
You get to decide which one gets it.
Give me the P. Just give me a P.
Okay.
TTOP.
Okay.
Then we're good.
So should we expect to see teams starting to use VR glasses in the dugout to get multiple plate appearances against a pitcher before their first time up?
Which conference was it here where you could do the thing where they had the bat, where you could do the VR thing? Well, to be honest with you, someone's going to try it and then the league will tell them they can't do it anymore. Anybody else? Yep. Over here. Ooh, that's an arm.
Throw. With the Smoltz example, I was just curious if the sign that, like if he was getting deeper into the 3rd time through the order was a sign that he was actually performing worse and would perform worse, and the manager knew that essentially. One other thing would be just as he's getting older, maybe he is truly fatiguing more. So those might be real effects, small samples acknowledged as well.
Yeah, well, the issue with Smoltz obviously is that he broke in when he was, I think, 21. So the second 5 years, he was still a young man, relatively speaking. And then in the rest of his career, we had a Tommy John interruption. And then for a while, he went out to the bullpen. And then he came back and was a great starter again. He was a real freak of nature. But yeah, that's one of the things I've wondered about this is can pitchers who show improvement, is it actually just that the manager is cognizant that leaving them out there is more of a risk than it was when they were younger, even if they're doing well so far? It's tough to be able to parse that sort of thing out. But yeah, it's certainly a possibility. Okay, anybody? Thank you very much.